Hi, Zizaran here with another episode of Path of Exile University. This is a series for new players. This is not the most basic class, but it is a lot of basic things here. So if you're pretty new to the game, you should learn a lot of things here. So this is what we're covering today. Understanding items, attack and defensive stats on items, rating items, how items are affected by modifiers, item level, talking about modifier interactions and local versus global, increased, reduced, more or less, and then reading skill gems. So, for example, of things we'll be covering, a lot of people, an easy thing to fuck up is increased physical damage on a wand. A lot of people use that on things like ethereal knives or explosive traps when it does not do damage because that is local only, which is what we're going to be covering here today. So, um, the terms that we are using are used both by GGD and players equally. You're not going to get any surprises. Um, and it is always very exact. And something we'll be covering later today is the difference between simple words like increased and more. They are not used interchangeably and have very, very big differences. So simple words like that can be a very big difference in Path of Exile, while you might think, in some games, it would just be a way you phrase things. So, um, all modifiers are either local to the item or global to the character. So most modifiers don't state this directly, and it's actually kind of annoying to find out. Like, the game doesn't really do a good job of telling you. But the modifiers will show up on the item itself if they're a local modifier by the color changing and things like that. So some modifiers do this by wording increased global, which, you'd think they would just make everything say local or global to make it easy, but this is Path of Exile and nothing is ever easy. Um, some modifiers will say all, and that will mean any modifier, and it'll be, for example, +1 all physical spell skill gems. And there will be others that will say socketed melee skill gems. So here we have weapon stats. So you can see that, you have the name at the top. This is a randomly generated name. This is the base type. And then we have loads of stats here. So we have quality, and items can go from 0 to 30 quality at the moment. And going past 20 will require you to do something special. So for new players, you're looking at between 0 to 20 quality. And you can see here, for example, the physical damage is turned blue. That means that it's being modified by the quality. We also have critical strike chance. Nothing on this item is modifying it, so it's white. Attacks per second, same thing. Item level 40, and it also requires level 40. Item level and required level is not the same. This could be required level 90. Require item level 90 or item level 86, which is currently the highest in the game. Um, and you could be able to use it on a level 2 character. So item level and required level are two different things. Just want to make that clear. We'll talk more about it later. Implicit modifier is 26 spell damage, and this can be used, for example, another example of implicit modifier would be Ruby Ring will have 20 to 30 fire resist, and you can change that with a Blessed Orb. Explicit modifiers, these are the stats, and items have up to 6 stats, 3 prefixes, 3 suffixes. And here you can see an example of global modifiers. The cold damage is global. Also, the implicit spell damage is global. There are implicits that are local as well. And then we have global crit strike multiplier. This one is easy to tell that it's global. And then +1 level of all fire spell skill gems. Here we have an armor, and we have defensive stats. You have the evasion rating and the energy shield. And you can see that it is being modified by these stats because they're blue. So these are local. So that just adds 23 maximum energy shield to the base of the cardinal armor. And what that would mean is if this armor also had percentage increased maximum energy shield, this would be further increased by that. And we have fire resist and lightning resist. So attack stats. The attack stats only modify the damage of the attacks you perform with the weapon. So, for example, if a item says added physical damage, then that is always local. And same with like a lightning damage, fire damage. They don't always specify 2 attacks either, unless they're on a ring or amulet. But yeah. So for melee weapons, it's easy to understand as you're generally using them to hit with. The big confusion here becomes, especially with wands, because wands will have caster items and attack items, or stats, sorry, on the same item. Now, the problem with this, and one of the biggest mistakes I'll see, is a lot of players might end up using something like Explosive Trap, or Ethereal Knives, or Blade Vortex early on. Physical skills are particularly confusing here, because a wand can have 60% increased physical damage and maybe 20% increased spell damage on a different one. And you might be like, well, do I want 60% increased physical damage or do I want 20% increased spell damage? Well, I'm a physical skill, so of course I will use the physical damage wand. And this is probably the most common fuck up that I regularly still see. And that is because physical damage on a wand is always local. You can never get something like that. There will be some different cases where it'll say global physical damage somewhere. But wands are not where that happens. So, there are also exceptions, like Spell Slinger and Battle Mage, that will cause your attack stat to become spell stats. But yeah, that is only when you're doing something more advanced, so it's not something you're going to run into as a new player on accident. So, if a stat is being increased on an item and if it's local, the white text will be changed. And we'll have some further examples of that too. And if they are completely white, they're not being modified by anything on the item. Global modifiers do not modify the visible stats, and only local modifiers have effects. Like here you can see the elemental damage, 4 to 88 lightning damage. It doesn't specify 2 attacks, but you can see that it's added here, and that means that it is local. So what does local physical damage increase translate to on an amulet? On an amulet, it will still not add to spells because the text on the amulet will say 2 attacks. So that'll be when you're attacking. And if I didn't explain it well enough already, the difference between local and global, local means that it's affecting the item. And the item will then be what you're attacking with. So for example, now that it says 4 to 88 elemental damage here, this is local. That means that it only happens if you're using Kinetic Blast, or if it was like a sword, then, Molten Strike, something like that. Like anything you're attacking with the weapon. A spell is never attacking with the weapon. It needs modifiers that are global. So spell damage, fire damage to spells, critical strike chance with spells. If you have percentage lightning damage on a wand, it'll be global. If you have flat lightning damage like this, it'll be local. And that's why we're trying to explain this too, because Path of Exile doesn't do a good job of explaining it. Here we have the 13 to fire damage to spells. It's global. It does not show up anywhere here, and it only affects spells. Therefore, it is a global modifier. Mana as well, also a global modifier. So local will always be presented by a different color number on the weapon. Yes. Item level and requirements. The only thing that doesn't show up as a different color would be like socketed level of melee gems. Doesn't change color on anything, but it's still local. Well, it's not local per se, but it's socketed to that weapon. Anyway, it's confusing. That's why we do this. Item level and requirements. So item level and level requirements to wear are not directly linked. Item level dictates the modifiers that can be rolled on the item. So higher modifier tiers have higher level requirements. Do not use item level as the stat of goodness. You use that. It is only there to tell you the maximum tier of modifiers that an item can have. So currently in the game, and the latest things that have been added is item level 86. That was probably added within 2 or 3 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if within the next year or two we get something at item level 87 or 88. They are pretty careful about adding things at higher item levels. We can currently in the game get up to item level 100. But as of now, there's no difference between item level 86 and item level 100. Items will not roll better or anything like that. So at the moment, item level 100 is the same as item level 86. No difference at all. It's worth mentioning for people that want to do further reading, but there can be cheesing with getting a better chance to craft things by not having the highest item level if there are mods that you want to avoid completely. So there's a lot to do in Path of Exile crafting. At higher item level, you can roll the highest tiers, and you should always craft on the highest level item possible, unless you're crafting a low level item with a purpose. So sometimes you'll do that for avoiding Fizz's extra chaos or Elemental as extra chaos. Like sometimes like some chaos mods will be like item level 82, 86, and there will be some things that like item level 50 and different thresholds. So a quick example of when this would be useful. Sometimes people are trying to get shields with +1 gem levels, and especially if you're trying to get a +1 chaos shield, the chaos mod starts at like, I can't remember without looking it up, but it's like 68 or 69. And at a lower level, if you exalt with a chaos exalt, chaos +1 level will be the only thing that exists. Whereas if you go the highest level, you can get multiple things. So by choosing the item level, you can guarantee yourself things sometimes. That's why it's worth mentioning. So item level limits the modifiers that can appear on the item when it's rolled naturally. So that's with currency, game mechanics like harvest or fossils. The crafting bench can be used to bypass this. The crafting bench can actually be used to bypass pretty much anything, even socket requirements. Like for example, it's item level 50 to get a 6 socket. There's no item level requirement to 6 sync, only to socket. Like if an item has 6 sockets, you can always 6 sync. But for example, if you have an item level 35 item, you would need the crafting bench to get it 6 socketed. And the same with an item level 2 weapon, can have an item level 50 craft from the bench, but it cannot roll that modifier naturally. You can also bypass this by essences, but only on the mod specified on the essence. So here we have increased fast effect duration on belts, and this is the tiers it has. So you can see here we have tier 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And at tier 1, it requires item level 82. At tier 5, it only requires item level 8. And you can see the effect difference here. And then modifiers can change the item locally or your character globally. So, seeing if a stat changes on an item is an easy way to see if the modifier is local or global, but in some cases, a normal local modifier will be global on another item base. So this is what we talked about earlier with rings and amulets. So, for example, increased maximum energy shield, which are never local as rings don't have energy shield. And that's a good way to think about it. If it's not something that an item can like regularly have, like on your chest, right? You can have energy shield. On your shield, you can have energy shield. But a ring normally can't have energy shield. It's normally a special stat. And yeah, it just ends up working differently. It's not something that you can keep rolling. Like a shield, you can have flat energy shield, percentage energy shield, and hybrid energy shield. On a ring, it's always just like the flat in that way. It always ends up being global. And generally, pretty much everything on rings it's where the stats are most likely to be global. So, types of modifiers on items, quality, flat added, and here we have loads of examples of stats, increases and reductions, and more or less. We're going to be covering more or less and increased and reduced. They're very, very important in Path of Exile as well. Go next slide here. So quality increases the attack or defensive stat on the item, and this means only the attack stats are increased even on ones. Quality can also appear as an increased modifier to socketed gems and to all gems on some cases. Some special types of quality on gear acquired from various endgame sources change the effect of quality, and it's not always a positive change. So for example, through Harvest, you can make it so that your wand, instead of the quality increasing physical damage, your wand will quality on your wand will increase AoE or attack speed or elemental damage. I'll answer a quick question here because it's pretty relevant. What about a percentage defense mod on a base that doesn't include it, like evasion or armor helmet getting percentage ES? That will do nothing at all. Next up, we have flat added modifiers, and they're summed together with your base stats. So, a level 95 Marauder has 1,194 base life, and a total of 770 maximum life on gear, and 116 from passives on the tree. So now we have 2,080 life. And if you have a legacy item with minus max life, it will just be subtracted from the total, but you can't get that anymore. Flat added critical hit chance is also applied to the sum of your base, an additional chance to critical hit. So some examples of where this becomes confusing is sometimes a player will find a shield that says 100% increased critical strike chance with spells, but that doesn't mean you always crit. And the reason that doesn't mean you always crit is you have a base crit. So spells, for example, will get their base crit from the spell. So a fireball, for example, could have a 6% chance to crit. However, a weapon could have a 9 or a 10% chance to crit. So if I have a 10% chance to crit and I get a 100% increased critical strike chance with spells, then it goes from 10% to 20. If you have 200, then it goes 30, etc. Like it increases it by the base. And that is why base crit is so strong. And here we have increased and reduced. They're summed together and then used as the modifier on the base value. So we have the same Marauder, 2080 total max life, but we have 195% increased maximum life. So now we're doing 2080 ends up being multiplied by 295, and with 2080 base, we end up with 6,136 life. And that means that all increases and reductions are always additive to each other. And this is why more multipliers are so powerful, because they're multiplied by each other. So if you have 225 increased life, and you end up having something that has 30% reduced life, like a chest or something with a penalty, or there's a wand. No, that's just reserved life. But either way, there are unique items with reduced life. You'll end up with 195 total increased. And it won't like multiply with that. It'll add itself together as if you just were missing 30% increased life instead. More modifiers are so much more powerful. A lot of people call Path of Exile Path of More multipliers or Path of Multipliers. And that's because I always forget this word. It's when exponential. It becomes very exponential. So like you'll see that once you're really investing into a character, you might be thinking that, oh, you're only getting a 1% more here, 1% more there, 1% more there, 0.5% more there, but it really adds up. And before you know it, you've gone from 2 million damage to 20. And it really becomes like that if you ever load up somebody's like very, very high level min-max profile on PoE Ninja, what you'll see is just taking off one item can be like 10, 20, 30 million damage. So it's like an insane amount of damage from very, very, what looks like little. And that's because the more multipliers are so important because they all work together. And yeah, they're the last step in calculating the final value. So we'll have the same Marauder with 6136 life, but now we do 10% more maximum life from passives, 40 max life from gear, and 20 max life from passives. Now you can see the math here. And now we end up on 7,559 life. All the more and less modifiers are multiplied against each other. These are not summed together. And this allows you to never go into negative multipliers, but you can approach 0. And damage over time multiplier is a more multiplier. And the most confusing thing by this, and a good thing to understand, is different groups can be multiplied against each other. So if you have, let's say at the start of the game, right? Let's say that you had the chance to go 20% more damage or 20% increased damage at the start of the game. but this is in a vacuum. You have nothing else. They're actually the same because you don't have any additives, any increased for the more multipliers to work against, or more multipliers for the more multipliers to work against. So another thing that's important here is, for example, somebody in chat mentioned Bottled Faith, and that actually has enemies take increased damage. And this is different than you doing increased damage, right? Like you'll get spell damage, you can get increased lightning damage, but when it then says enemies take increased damage, that is a different group. They can't be added to the same pool. So if you have, let's say you have 280% increased spell damage, lightning damage, totaling up to that, and then you have Bottle Faith or something that gives you, let's say, enemies take 20% increased damage. That doesn't go from 280 to 300. It goes 280, and that 20 becomes a more multiplier. So there are some examples like that where it'll just be a different group. Whereas if you have a lot of that, so for example, shock, or from things like skitterbots, or there's something called aspect of the spider, which is enemies take more increased damage, take increased damage. Those would be additive with each other, and then that entire group would be multiplied. But yeah, and damage over time multiplier is a more multiplier. It's different than like increased damage over time, for example, which is increased. So we're going to take a look at some examples and their modifiers. Here we have 15 to 27 physical damage. And you can see here that the physical damage is blue. We have 1 to 40 lightning damage to attacks. You can see that this has been added here. And we have attack speed has been changed. That means that this is blue. Fire damage to spells doesn't show up anymore. That's global. 77% increased fire damage. That's also global. You can see, I'll let you look at this a little bit more. It is pretty easy to see once you know what you're looking for, but definitely part of what makes Path of Exile so complicated. Here's another one. Local attack stats can also be elemental or chaos. So here we have 25% increased chaos damage. That's global. But we also have flat chaos damage, and you can see that's like pink, and that's local. Critical strike chance is always local, and the only time it's like you have global critical strike multiplier, and you also have critical strike chance to spells. But if it just is like this, critical strike chance, it's local. And then the stun duration is global. So this one has not a single local modifier. It's all global. The spell damage, the cold damage, the lightning damage to spells, the mana, and the cast speed. And the only reason the physical damage is blue is because we have 7 quality on it. Yeah, there's colors on the mods. Chaos damage pink. Conversion of damage mods and X damage is Y are applied to base values of stats before you increase them more. And this is something, hopefully this gets changed in the future, because both on enemies and ourselves, this is far too powerful and ends up in players doing conversion loops. And that's a pain. For defensive calculations, this does not apply. This is only relevant to dealing damage or calculating character stats. Like, you can never convert damage taken twice. That actually killed me one time because we didn't know until 3 years ago. X added as Y allows you to take the benefit of increased and more multipliers for both types of damage, the original and the new type. So sometimes it's beneficial to scale the base damage via your weapon and then scale the converted damage from your passives and other gear choices. So it's very common to do, like, for example, the Call of the Brotherhood rings. So you'll do like fist damage and convert that to another and convert that to another, and then you're getting your benefits several times, basically, especially on things like fist is extra. And yeah, conversion loops can be insanely powerful. Now, very, very often done on softcore because you end up foregoing a lot of defense and then just going full glass cannon. So full fire conversion chieftain uses a high physical damage weapon which has a large portion of base fizz as extra fire, and then scales both physical modifiers and fire modifiers. And global defense applies to armor, evasion, energy shield, and ward, and it's additive with other increases and reduction, and it is global. And that's in the name too. Ideally, we want them to rework things and make it way more clear when things are local or global. It's a little hard to understand in Path of Exile at the moment. It's important to read every part of your skill gem. This is another confusing thing, and it's actually something you can learn a lot from as a new player and help you figure out the game. So the tags tell you what type of skill it is and the compatibility with support gems. If you have shared tags with a skill gem and a support, it does not mean it will modify every single portion of the skill gem. Like AoE might only affect sometimes just the radius. Sometimes it can't be affected like the damage and things like that. And active skills can have multiple stages or different types of cast and attack effects. The description will tell you if the skill is a simple single effect or one with multiple effective stages. Sometimes a skill will have a actual hit and a projectile, like lightning strike. And descriptions can get really long, but there is a lot of useful stuff in the information. And even if you're reading a guide, it's worth reading. Like Fireball has a very, very small splash. It's unleashes a ball of fire towards target enemies, which explodes, damaging nearby foes. But there are other skills, for example, Essence Drain, that'll tell you that like it'll let things like spell damage affect the damage over time portion. So here we have the name, we have the tags, gem level, combat stats, and for spells, gem level is huge. It's generally how we scale it. And then crit chance. So base crit chance is tied to spells. And here we have effect of added damage. Effect of added damage is very, very big on slower things or things that are like traditionally slower. So Fireball has a very high one. And things that are fast, for example, Blade Vortex, will have a low effective damage. That's to make it so that if you're playing Fireball and you get 100 fire damage to spells added, that's way bigger than for Blade Vortex. And then gem XP. And if a gem hits level 2 and you don't level it up instantly, it's not continuing to gain XP. You can't go from level 1 to 9 just by clicking. Skill gems with the tag support are considered support gems, and they don't perform any actions by themselves. They only affect and modify active gems. They can trigger effects, they can deal damage, but only as a part of an active skill or as a trigger for active skills, like Ignite and Combustion, things like that. Not all support gems do anything with active gems, even if the tags are compatible. And when you're buying a support gem on the vendor or finding one on the ground, there will be a small window displayed next to the gem showing which currently socketed gems are supported and which are not. This does not mean it's going to be a good support skill, it just tells you that the support does something. We'll show you that in a sec. So here we have same fire, fizz, support. Gem XP, very, very similar to active gems. Then we have a reservation multiplier. So that will increase the base cost of an active gem. Or if you put added fire damage on, for example, Herald of Purity, it'll increase the reservation. And the final mana is the product of all support gem multipliers, base mana cost. And then you have rings, for example, that can reduce mana cost as well. And it applies to auras. And it's common to have auras in their own socket groups. You don't accidentally socket a support. Like very, very often when I'm helping people with their builds, they're struggling on mana, they've accidentally put Arcane Surge with some of their auras or something like that. It's an easy thing to fuck up. Level 20 Fireball costs 25 mana, and adding LMP, Iron Will, and Fire Pen support makes Fireball cost 46 mana. So it's by 1.3, 1.3, 1.1. Rounds down to 46. Skitterbots reserves 35% total mana, and if you put Unbound Ailment, it's now 42. So much yawning. It's like being in school. The teacher would always yell at me for yawning. Didn't like it when I said I always yawn regardless. Skill gems and support gems. Incompatibility and support gems are not always clear. So let's look at the following combos of Fireball and added fire damage support. Here, they both have the tag fire, but if you read the support gem, it requires physical damage to be converted for it to work or to be added. Since Fireball doesn't have base fist damage, there's no synergy here. Sometimes gems can have effects that are not explained, and generally holding ult is a really good way to learn things in this game. So ult is just extended information. So you can see here, it grants you 20% attack, cast, and movement speed from Onslaught. Because initially it just tells you that it gives you Onslaught, but it doesn't tell you what Onslaught is. And down here at the bottom, you can see what quality on the item works, or what it does. Quality on skill gems increase the predetermined bonus. The vast majority of skills have alternative quality options, which change the quality bonus granted by the gem. These are acquired from Heist and unusual gem rewards listed on them. So here you can see we have Phantasmal, which is 2% of lightning damage converted to chaos damage, whereas the normal one is projectile speed. This could also make the gem worse for some builds. Like sometimes it'll actively hurt your build, like slower projectile speed. Here we have Divine Ire, and here you can see that there's starting to be a lot more information. So here it is worth reading. Like Beam deals 110 more damage per hits per stage after the first. And there's just so much information on the gem. And oops. And like Essence Drain as well. Like there are gems that will tell you that things apply differently to the gem. So even this text, there's probably a lot of people watching this that have probably just thought this is just like a little splosh introducing the gem to a new player, but it does have important information. And it'll also here on weapons, it'll tell you like can only be used with swords or axes, etc. So very, very important information there. The thing about Path of Exile is that you accrue so much information over time. Like you just passively learn a lot of this stuff, and it is a lot to learn.